Tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haramai. My name is Sienna Raymond, and welcome once again to my podcast, Clearing Trauma from Discrimination. Karakia, tā tai tuarangi Māori, whenua Māori, tinana manawa hene ngaro, wairua Māori, ki te katoa, mauri ora Māori, ahau, Māori, tūturu o whiti whakamaua kia tīna, haumi e, hui e, tae ki e. Episode 2. The dream is dead, long live the nightmare. There's no doubt about that. The realities are far better to have anyway, even with all their trauma-causing fusions. What does it mean? The dream is dead, long live the nightmare. Herewith submitting my understanding of this. In the 1960s, 70s, the falling of the self, my little self, my one that is small and easily persuaded, and as there was no one of reasonable availability at the time of being conditioned, I could only absorb the Māori my perpetrators were exuding to me, and I can only use the race name Pākehā to mean my perpetrators of psychic harm on my little self. The hurt and pain are unimaginably destructive of soul and spirit, agony of heart and mind and body. This is what the nightmare means of a truth to an Indigenous child. Suffering, and I cannot soothe it. As an Indigenous child of my time, going to school, being in my community was not a choice. So I faced my perpetrators daily. After facing a night of worry, hand-wringing and needy crying, all my inner organs were breaking. My parents, Mum in particular, was in her childhood exposed to racial degradation, beating, and set on holy damnation by the Catholic nuns. I add here this is widespread throughout Indigenous experiences of first contact with religion. And brave Mum, she stood up for herself and decided not to return to the native school, espousing to her parents, I will not tolerate the beatings from the nuns any longer. The model she drew on to make this distinction was her father. He never raised a hand to his children. He never hit them, ever. And so at the tender age of 12, in 1937, Mum stopped her Western education. This would not bode well for her in later years, but we all know now that her generation, raised and purposefully directed from behind the scenes, I say this without conspiratorial adjunction, to be the labour force of the country. My mum was born in 1925 in the Hokianga, fondly known as the cradle of Catholicism. Raised on a farm that was their own, known at the time as dairy co-ops, iwi had adopted this opportunity to sustain whānau. It was a model delivered here from England. This was a massive tribal, or to put it into sociological terms, a massive social change within the fibres of our race and culture. Basic education in the Western world began at the same time, and as far as dreams go, of seeing the world and knowing new things, these were out of reach for my mum, or not because she'd not be able to obtain these experiences. Mum was the third eldest of what would become a large whānau of 11 tamariki. The two eldest children had left home by Mum's 12th year stand. This left Mum as the tuakana on board. My grandfather, Mum's father, he, like so many from his generation, had a secondary to university level education and quite a substantial knowledge of the world. My grandparents had met in Pangaru in the early 1900s. My grandfather was at the time working for the New Zealand Company. He was surveying the land. His younger brother was the assistant chainman. Together they travelled throughout Northland. My mum has said that in those times, Māori didn't get the recognition. So although Grandad was well qualified for surveying, they wouldn't give him the ticket. My grandfather belonged to the kotahitanga period in our history. They committed this generation to leadership and knowledge. It was a distant cry from me. My grandfather's and great-grandfather's generations weren't the labour force. Instead, having an education and knowledge first at the foundation of their culture, and second, at university level for a Western education. They knew the world and its machinations. I often wonder if the British of that time thought of these generations as gentry, which would have, in theory, made them equals, gentrified class. That might have, and I speculate here, been most unpalatable for the empire, to have indigenous gentry. Mum told us a whakatauki of her father's. It goes like this: cultivate the knowledge of the Pākehā with your hands and tinana, but keep your heart and your crown, the top of your head, to your culture. I can track the changes because of Mum and Dad. Both were orators, both spoke about the history of their everyday. They couldn't talk about the traditional Māori path because of the covenants that both convinced were best, the Pākehā way and world for their children. Sadly, this way caused so much pain that today the process of undoing is more the legacy now. That is the beautiful pūrākau of my parents' childhoods. In my writing this episode for this podcast, I intend to weave the memories given to me of my mother's childhood story into this content. My 6-year-old and Mum's 6-year-old are a gulf apart. I measure that by 2 distinctions. My son's 6-year-old, he's now 37, and his son's 6-year-old. They have more in common at these ages. Both born in suburbia, each is on a Western path, living in a white Eurocentric world, one far beyond my reach. Do I envy that? Sounds like an instruction. Would I envy such comparatives of my son and his son? Would I like my soul to burn in the sun? No. The second distinction is obvious, and it fills me with respect, an emotion and sensation that I can only feel now that I live in my maturity. It is the migration of my mother from her country home in the Hokianga to the city, Tāmaki Makaurau, Auckland. That momentous step taken in a whole new world, it must have been invigorating. I guess, surmise, speculate. Reading books on this historic social event, these tell the hearts and minds of the personalities within. I often wonder about the crippling effect on this on the church as they emptied of their flock. Their hold on the people might have physically ended in degrees, but they worked to assimilate, to save us from our savagery, from the evil that Indigenous had been. Mum was no longer as a small child, and so the cosmos called to her. For Mum, working in the sewing industry and later in manufacturing industries, the start and finish lines were a joke. It was an adjustment of timings that would take Mum a lifetime, used to being up at 4 a.m. every day since 6 years of age, and the day ending after cows milked, farming sorted, gardens are watered, weeded, and siblings are fed and nurtured. Mum's day ended on a sliding age scale from 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. and even later. Mum had worked so hard by the time she'd migrated to the city that she found factory work too easy. Her capacity for work far outstripped what was on offer. Mum's famous saying to me in her maturity was, "Always be true to yourself." Having learned the hard lessons of life, the hardship of working and working, of not being at the equal share of the table of profits. I can understand this saying better today, better than I ever did when Mum lived and physically walked this earth. The city was new, shiny. There was more freedom, technology and wonder. Most of all, it was achievable for a young and physically powerful woman from the country, and my mother was powerful. It took me years of working out in gyms and sports events to realise what it takes to build muscle strength and endurance. Mum had all that before she was 17. At 6, Mum was up at 4 a.m. with her 2 older siblings and their dad, learning the basics of leading the cows to the sheds for milking. By the by, they did the milking by hand in those days, and 4 a.m. is still dark, even in the far north. After that task, Mum learnt the method of cleaning out the sheds afterwards. I remember being told the cows knew when it was milking time. They literally lined up outside the milking sheds. Isn't that just beautiful cooperation on the side of the cows? Mum learnt all there was to learn about animal husbandry, fencing, clearing the paddocks of gross weeds, the upkeep and maintenance of all their farming equipment and machinery. Mum was in charge once the 2 older siblings left the farm to find work elsewhere. Their outsourced labour was to be an important contribution to a growing whānau. Adding to Mum's responsibility was the absence of their father. He as well needed to work away from home. With 3 of the whānau doing their best to send a steady income home, it's obvious that making ends meet in those times, as early as the 1930s and pre-World War II, it was still difficult for whānau to have the luxury of everyone together, that the whānau could earn a good living from their farm. This also included my grandmother's enormous gardens of watermelons, hōwai, kumara, riwai, and orchards of fruit trees. They still needed to supplement their income. There was a proper system of food growing, manufacturing, processing, preserving, and selling to make a living. They were fair dinkum. Mum gave it her best. The work ethic and physical, mental, and spiritual strength Mum grew on her farm, to me, is cosmic wahine eternal. Mum told us the story of her working life on the farm, as I have said in here, from a young age of 6, through her entire lifetime on this planet, living in this country. I believe respect for the efforts put outward is too low. Honouring Mum is much better. It takes a mammoth will to overcome the odds of caring for a large whānau of siblings, the day-to-day care of the farm, as well as looking to the future always for that which lies just below the horizon. To plan ahead and make hay, to keep milking cows fed well all year round in the 1920s, 30s, 40s. True, it's not a single-handed effort of one person, and sadly when Mum's father passed away at their homestead in 1940, the significance of his absence altered the fabric of their lives for generations. Mum was 17 at Granddad's death. I remember the story so well. Mum's ability to tell it to us was so magnificently sad that I got caught in the emotions and transported back to 1940. I too would be there in their living dining room with Mum. It was just the 2 of them. His grandfather sat in the rocking chair in front of the fire. Grandfather spoke to Mum, saying, "If you were a man, you'd lick this whole cockeyed world." The smile was both remorse and hope, whilst the green in both grandfather's eyes sparkled with knowledge and compassion. They were the last words spoken by a man of great love and wisdom for his whānau and the world being left behind. Though we never knew Grandad, I can only measure the weight of losing him in the lonely years of struggling through the path of destruction to grow to grow in a world triggered by the acceptance of me being a Māori, no matter how hard I had attempted not to be. It's foolish of me to wish to have had Grandad living and guiding me through the painful process of colonisation, rejection, and colonisation again. Would I even have? It's not wise to take that trail. That one is worse than failing. I believe it's not I that ought to be checked for the failing. At the lofty levels of Crown rulership, government leadership, religious influential organisations and municipals doing everything in their best interest to keep colonisation active, I believe it is not fair to ask me that question about why did Māori fail? When I look at my journey, when I seek the truth within my mother and father's pūrākau, I can see a genuine effort in all our parts to assimilate and integrate into the European Pākehā-fied brown-skinned person. And I vouch for me and say here with hand on heart, I really tried. And yet the people, white New Zealand Europeans of the time of my birth and growth, they continued to treat me and espouse to me my worthless animal savage cannibal status. Herein, I believe, lies the dilemma that though the righteous plan to colonise was happening at the lofty levels, at the everyday levels of people toing and froing, consumption and commodification, of the likes of me doing my best to Europeanise, I take comfort in this knowledge, yet not at this juncture. Nothing is different, and the dream is dead. Therein lies the truth. Whilst the lofty levels work their hearts out in their own fashion, with years of experience from colonising in other countries, using the evidence and data captured, the lofty levels had a good head start. However, I believe they failed in not getting the people at the level of the everyday, the children I went to school with, to be on board, to acknowledge and accept us as equal to and the same as they, not because of anthropology, theology, and later sociology, because, therefore, colonisation, is it not? Lofty levels failed, not me, and not the rhythm of the heart, the rhythm of the attempts. I made these in good faith and hope and trust, forever written on the cosmic records. Do I feel resentment at what I could deem cheating, settling the score in this essay? They cheated me out of my fair share of colonisation. That's mental stuff. I don't think it's meant to work that way anyway. Lofty levels can tell me forever in a day that it is, and this is where the cleavage is. I think hidden and made obvious in the lofty levels. It was and might still be beliefs that the author of this work is a savage descendant from cannibals. The sayers of this have their stolen shrunken mokokowe hidden in their private galleries to prove it. Everyday levels of the toing and froing, they'll never accept me. I recognise this every time I walked into a workplace from the time of 16 to now. I trigger non-Māori at the moment of meeting. I remember Ed, name changed to protect me, from a car dealership, name omitted to protect me, in Pakuranga. It was a summer job I worked at, car grooming at 17 and not at all wise to workplaces. They had a mechanical workshop where Ed and I were located, and every day Ed hounded and perpetrated me about Māori committing all the crimes in the country. It was all over the news. The Herald was the everyday focus for Ed, as this newspaper printed everything worst and worst of all about Māori. The work environment for me was so hostile that for 6 months I felt nothing but shame and pain. And Ed, I saw him smile with delight at the sight of my clear mortifications. Yes, I shared the experience with my whānau. I told Mum day after day of the horror of working with Ed. What do I do? What do I say to him? Why is he picking on me? Normal questions that any 17-year-old would ask. At a time when we are discovering our use and valued contribution, not to mention the magazine showing off beauty and begging us all to pluck our eyebrows, Ed made me feel really ugly and worthless. At home, there was pressure on my parents to protect our ancestral lands. These were being hunted down by the corporations and councils. It was a real concerted effort by my parents to safeguard the land. And in the 1970s and 80s, the reality of us living in the nightmare, that was emerging for me. What I speculate must have been insensible, that Māori have by simply being in a natural state of commodification, wealth and status. This must have incensed both lofty and everyday levels, that our Māori society reflected England's gentry class. It's so difficult at 17 to explain the racial perpetration of me to my mum, as it had been an experience for her with the Catholic nuns. I knew the story of that light which brought the darkness. I'd first heard it in my adolescence, so turning to her with this horror of an experience seemed like the right thing to do. Neither of us really knew the answer. It takes a lot of skill to deal with an angry male like Ed. It takes years of knowledge to know how to come back with dignity from Ed. For sure, it was my situation alone. Did I expect Mum to come to my workplace and sort my experience of racism out with the manager of the site? I also did a good job of hiding the distress, anxiety and my fears of daily facing Ed. I damned the Herald every day for its cursed biased reporting that was causing me this pain. It truly affected my mental health, as do all the experiences of racism. I got very low. It isn't a skip through a field of yellow flowers. Long live the nightmare. Vowing, after suffering through 6 months of Ed's racial onslaughts, to never let such a thing happen to me again, I finally faced up to the manager of the site. I came in one morning after a sleepless night of worry. You know, in those times, 1980, there was no comfortable process to address racism in the workplace. Yet I had not been at work for several days. It was time to turn into the coalface. I spoke to the manager about my experience and concerns with Ed, sharing whilst shaking and crying for my distress at being purposely humiliated in front of all the boys in the workshop, the sales team, and the petrol forecourt staff. He agreed with me that giving immediate notice was in the best interest of mine and the company. I would not be returning to work. To my utter surprise, the manager acknowledged Ed had this way about him. To note, Ed was actually retired. He was a good friend of the owner of the car dealership. He knew of Ed's ongoing tirades about Māori. When I could finally confront Ed, you know what he told me? "Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm married to a Maori, and I was just trying to teach you some important lessons. I'm not racist. I have daughters." Ed came after me because of being the only Māori working in this car dealership, being fully available for Ed. He was literally on a high every day. I made his days worthwhile working at that dealership. This confession sickened me, yet in my youthful years indeed being colonised, I was more upset colonisation, had betrayed me. I gave myself over to this promise of this dream of equality and social acceptance, that I was a Pākehā Māori, one of the Empire's subjects. Though, at the time, if the truth be said, I was too young to know this was at the root of my unease, And at the incident of 17, it did not rip the armour of colonisation off me. No, I was still, despite this fateful warning of more racism to come, I still, feet firmly planted on the path of destruction, in deep denial, I would continue this way. Even the years ahead of me carried on tempting me, calling my spirit name and carving my soul into the falsehood of the dream. I believed in it. What else did I have? No traditional Māori path, no genuine hope of a future in a nation that really never wanted me, the Māori. And I gave them what was required. I betrayed my own parents because they taught me that. This is the nightmare. Colonisation gave me Māori within my psyche, who were all the words and ways of my childhood. Could I discern and logically discriminate truth from propaganda? We had to sacrifice our identity and do it blindly. And as I colonised, a Eurocentric, Pākehā-fied, brown-skinned person, I couldn't reconcile with my tupuna, with my parents, with anyone who behaved and lived, even in the remotest and slightest of ways, Māori. Were we not punished for this, dear mother, dear mum? Did the nuns not beat you, brand you, grow their despise in you, to loathe your language? Oh, the light that brought the darkness, dear Catholic religion, no end to the visual pain. We see violence on TV and cringe, and yet a man nailed to wood, spread out on a cross, blood and suffering, call with longing to the observer of this trauma. It is important, you say. Your authority, its decision-making process, pines in the secret hope of victory that Indigenous children must pay. We pay the price for this huge social change. Bring it the thing they crest the horizon for. Upheaval for clarity. What a dream. A dream that we must pay like the man on the wooden cross for suffering of the skin, bone, muscle, nerve, brain, heart, fibre, joints. Starve them of their identity, withhold from them, on and on and on and on. 'Tis meant to bring cleansing. I can say it in so many ways without ever saying it at all, and yet I can hear it on these pages as loud as thunderclaps and volcanic eruptions. Identity lost. We take those who assisted this at their word. I did. Teachers, political leaders. Why not? Why would I believe anyone else? They offered comfort, beauty, riches beyond the wealth of my little world, consumption, commodification, security, hope, superior health, and money to make money. But there are conditions, a catch. Grow a thick skin, ignore the racism, carry on, don't stop, hang in there, pray, go to church, pick up the pieces and start again. Don't look back, just keep going. Like feed me false hope whilst I decay in this long-lived nightmare. My destruction is my salvational path. I come full circle at last, awake from the dream and living the nightmare. Lived with my energy guided correctly. Do you know the old saying about when you see a hole in the footpath, walk around it? And yet we know it takes many attempts to not walk into the hole, and if one does fall in the hole, it takes years to climb out of it. Of course, I believe me, being on the path of destruction, this is me true to my indigenuity within the Western collective material world. I believe my saying, born Māori will always be Māori, is true. Colonisation can never alter this truth. It can only delude. I believe me to take the time to show me the racism, discrimination, alienation, segregatory societies, each function with a fundamentalistic individual dogma, all Māori cannot be trusted, and therefore herein lies the dilemma of my early colonial education. In all Western-centric paradigms that I work at, this author of the podcast you listen to now will have to prove and prove and prove my value and worth. That cannot, by preposition, be accepted. I believe it's labelled as stereotyping, and the risk here to this work, that white European New Zealanders, I caution myself by using Pākehā, as this word for many embodies pain from past hurts. It draws its breath from the coloniser. Listening to this podcast could take the work and pick it apart to prove the other side of the shadow. That the work presents no evidence of trauma and harm. This work by European standards is anecdotal, and I produced it for Indigenous people to unite me. The pain of the Indigenous child and their immense inner strength I inherit balms my sores as I retell the story of my mum's childhood with the experience of beatings from the nuns. I felt each and every stroke across her back, behind, legs, arms, and face. The Indigenous child pays in pain their way into the Western material world with strike after strike after strike, bearing the way, scoring into the path of destruction. Their souls grieve and are rising to this with their indelible, unbreakable wairua. Gratitude is not my inheritance. The inner strength is my inheritance, passed from Indigenous child to the next Indigenous child, discovered once I triumphed on the path of destruction. Mine is joy. My lifeline, the traditional way of my race and culture. Find your lifeline, beloved Indigenous child. Thank you for being here, for listening to this podcast. Please join me again at the start of February for episode 3, The Indigenous Child.